Today's episode features a woman who, in the beginning, is someone you could see yourself rooting for, and had all the markings of a decent human being. But in the end, there's a good chance you'll detest her. I'm talking about Marge Schott. She owned the Cincinnati Reds for 15 years, and became the first woman ever to purchase a Major League Baseball team. Her only flaw was she was an anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, inconsiderate, cheap, narcissistic monster. She used the N-word casually, admired Hitler for his infrastructure in Germany, and hypocritically believed baseball wasn't a place for women. Based on our research, she was so notorious for her poor sportsmanship, her character even bled into pop culture. I'll take you on a journey, telling you all about this offensive and bizarre woman. Hopefully you'll learn a thing or two along the way. This is The History According to Cracked. I'm Brian Morabito. As I'm sure you learned in your history classes, baseball and racism go hand in hand, like my dog and his insatiable love for goose poop. It's no secret that racism didn't end when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947. In many respects, it got worse. Hate mail and death threats littered the mailboxes of some of baseball's greatest legends. For years, accepting black baseball players in a white-dominated sport was an uncomfortable pill to swallow for every single hater who watched the sport. It would take another 12 years for the entire Major League to integrate. The Red Sox eventually hung up their hats in reluctancy, and reluctantly joined the league, seemingly to avoid a judicial order to, not be racist. Think of the most infamous villains in baseball. I'll give you a second, because granted, there are a few. But I'm not talking about Pete Rose, who famously gambled in his own sport, or when Pedro Martinez threw this baby on the ground. The villain I'm talking about is from a famous baseball movie, starring everyone's favorite villain, Charlie Sheen. Yes, Major League, a film wherein a dastardly woman owns a fictional version of the Cleveland Indians. Now, they don't mention much racism, but the amount of intentional incompetence of Rachel Phelps, former Las Vegas showgirl, seems pretty linked to the personality of Marge. In 1968, Marge Schott inherited her wealth from her late husband, Charles, who was an Ohio auto tycoon. In 1981, she bought a minority share of the Cincinnati Reds, and in 1984 purchased a controlling interest in the club for a reported $11 million, which just so happened to be the budget for Major League. Coincidence? Maybe. But this purchase made her the first woman ever to buy her own Major League team. It started out fine. She was no showgirl, but she remained very personable, sat with the fans in the stands, offered low tickets and concession prices, and in 1990, the Reds won the World Series. Again, a year after Major League, wherein an unlikely set of baseball heroes wins the World Series, against all odds. Then what was the deal, Marge? If you were so friendly, why did everyone hate you? Oh, right. Because you can still be very nice and very, very racist. And in this instance, weird as fuck. She was the type of person who seemed nice and called everybody honey, but only because she couldn't be bothered to learn anybody's name. Marge hated baseball. She didn't know a single thing about the game, nor who the majority of the players were on her own team. She forced players to drive themselves to spring training in Florida. She hated paying players' salaries who were on the injured list, and famously refused to pay for the team's celebratory meal after they won the title in 1990. This would kind of be like the President of the United States inviting over the winning college football team to the White House and feeding them only McDonald's because of, quote, budgetary issues, and they, quote, like McDonald's. Who doesn't like McDonald's? One time during a Reds home game in 1996, a home plate umpire, John McSherry, collapsed in the field. An hour later, he was pronounced dead from a heart attack. The game was canceled, and everyone was sad. Even Marge, who was also upset by the game's cancellation, asking, why can't they just play with two umpires? But for what she lacked in human compassion, she made up for her in her love for animals, especially her St. Bernard, Shotzi, which she kept with her at all times as the unofficial mascot of the team because she believed Shotzi had mystical powers. She would rub the dog's fur, then rub it on players for good luck. The Reds played on AstroTurf back then, and she'd let Shotzi roam free, pissing and shitting everywhere. The players had to avoid piles of dog shit and pools of urine like soldiers dodging landmines. She then made the employees clean up the mess. But all this was just bizarre. What happened to the lovable bigotry, right? The racism came out like racehorse piss, seemingly all too much and all too fast. In 1992, Tim Sabo, a former team executive, filed a lawsuit against Marge after he was fired. producing the most revealing and disturbing depositions ever. Not only did Marge frequently use the N-word, she once referred to star players Eric Davis and Dave Parker, both of whom were black, as, quote, $1,000,000 N-words. Sabo claims Schott instructed him to not hire black people because, quote, I don't want their kind here. I have to put up with them on the field. I'm not going to put up with them in the front office. Not to mention, she once described Jews as money-grubbing, ironically believed women didn't have a place in baseball, and described Martin Luther King Jr. Day as, quote, N-word Day. Now, in the least shocking turn of events of all time, she admired Hitler. Yes, that Hitler. Now, one of many things we could say about Marge Schott is that she never shied away from an interview. So, I sat down with her before she died. Why, you ask? Well, because it would be too difficult to do it after she died. Well, Marge, I think we should get started on a lighter note before we dive into the heavier stuff. Hitler's Germany. What do you think?
Everybody knows Hitler was good in the beginning, but he just went too far.
Too far. Yes, I'd say most people would agree. Too far is the accurate assessment of what turned out to be the Holocaust, absolutely. Now, how was Hitler good in the beginning?
All I was saying is, if you looked in history, Hitler came in, Germany was, I guess, in a depression or something, okay? And he came in and the roads that were built were phenomenal.
To think, if only he'd had stopped at sound infrastructure. Rumor has it, Marge, you personally own a Nazi armband with a swastika on it.
You can just call it a Nazi armband. The swastika's implied, honey.
Right, thank you for the clarification. So, you own one of those, or?
Yes, I do. It was a gift I got several years ago from a worker in one of my car agencies. He took it off a dead German. That's what they call, memorabilia? It's no big deal. I keep it in a drawer with the Christmas decorations.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'd keep mine, too. No. Marge kept dialing up the bigotry so much that the MLB couldn't look the other way anymore. So, they suspended her for multiple seasons, 2 separate times. And when they threatened to extend her suspension in 1999, she was forced to sell her share of the team, which she did for $67 million, a value of $123 million today. They sure showed her. In 2004, she died at the age of 75. As someone remarked after she passed, quote, she was a lonely, sad, miserable person. I'm sorry she passed away, but I flew back to Cincinnati to make sure she had died. That's the legacy of Marge Schott. She played America's favorite pastime, How Much is Too Much Racism, and lost. But not before she had a 15-year run of complete dominance in the sport. She was a pioneer, and despite the strange comparisons to how much some could argue that she paved the way for female owners today, it's hard to see the road, because it's covered in Schott's shit. I'm Brian Morabito. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fuck. I'm Brian Morabito. Thank you for watching another episode of History According to Cracked.